Demanding that heavy metal lyrics focus on racism, transgender rights, and social justice is a demand that heavy metal cease to exist. These issues are not accepted by a vast majority of the people. The people who believe that America is racist or that transgender women should participate in women's sports may be, depending on the issue, between 20 to 60%. Thus, demanding that heavy metal support these issues means that heavy metal support a political view, a political dogma, one side against the other. Support half the people against the other half, or support an ideological minority against the majority. Demanding that heavy metal lyrics focus on social justice is like demanding heavy metal songs say, "Vote for the Democrats." And not the old-fashioned Democrats, but only the new, woke ones. Satan, dragons, and war are a standard part of heavy metal. Social justice or politics in general are not. But even if this were done, it could not be overt, obvious. Consider condemnation of drugs. Now you're gonna die. Blinded, obey, dedicated to how I'm killing you. But there's nothing like, do not do drugs. This would be preaching. The actions and results can be mentioned, but no demands that the listener follow advice. I don't want kids to take drugs because of me, but I also wouldn't tell them to stay off of drugs. An anti-racism song, likewise, could mention the actions and results of racism, but could never state, say no to racism. The demand is that heavy metal adopt the dogma of a new mentality. So consider the anti-war lyrics of the 60s at the time of the Vietnam War. Imagine that today there is a new mentality, because both big parties in the United States mostly support wars in Iraq, Libya, Syria, and even risking war with Russia. It could be said that 60s music should be cancelled, or its lyrics should be reworked or changed, or that bands that still play 60s-type psychedelic music should not condemn war but support wars if they are carried out by American governments. The demand made is not that heavy metal oppose racism, sexism, and homophobia and support being nice to all people, but instead that heavy metal support specifically the belief that the United States is a racist society and that women are mistreated and that there be open borders, and support every view 100%. For example, not only support transgender bathrooms, but also support biological boys turned to transgender girls using the girls' school showers. All beliefs supported mostly by under half the population or even by only 20%, and this after intense media insistence. Must heavy metal support the vaccine? Must heavy metal support Ukraine? Must heavy metal tell fans who to vote for? Shouldn't heavy metal support the politically correct view on certain widely publicized issues, such as the need to combat racism? The most important fact here is that this would be preaching, and heavy metal does not do that. But there are heavy metal songs against war, for example, and against the church, or corrupt or ruthless politicians. True, but these are songs against the powerful and the establishment. Who is condemned as racist today? Not the big companies, politicians in general, and the very rich, but average people. People losing their jobs because of a sexist joke they made on social media years ago when they were teenagers, or because they disagreed with gay marriage, or disagreed with women having to share areas with a transgender, or disagreed with the idea that America is systemically racist. A fan of death metal can become the top scientist in the world in his field, the first to land a machine on a comet, while ideologues such as academics, journalists, and activists can only become the people who try to ruin the career of such a scientist because he wore a t-shirt with sexy women, a shirt given to him by a woman. Thus, the media demands the condemnation not of the powerful, but of average or working-class people. Heavy metal does not preach to teenagers or blue-collar workers about morals. There are no songs against racist jokes or comments, but there are also no songs against burglary. There were songs against war, but this was a very big issue, and still there were no songs specifically against Presidents Bush and Obama over their wars that resulted in 1.5 million dead. Should there be songs against a polarizing figure like President Trump? There were no songs against a polarizing figure like President Nixon in the 1970s either. Should there be songs against the border wall or against the discrepancy concerning the fact that the police kill a larger percentage of blacks compared to their percentage of the population than they do people of other races? But the same discrepancy in police shootings existed in the 1980s, and border walls were supported by the majority of both parties in 2006, and there were no songs about these issues back then either. But pop stars are taking a stand on these issues. Precisely. This is the point. Pop was seen by metal fans as the opponent, the enemy. Pop stars are rich people supported by the establishment. If the rich pop stars are supporting one view, a view that is also supported by the big media, then regardless of whether one agrees with this view or not, these pop stars, by taking this stand, are benefiting their careers. And supporting a view that is also supported by the establishment does not make the entertainer rebellious, the entertainer a rebel. What screams establishment more than this? Opposing racism might have been rebellious in the past when the establishment was supporting a different view, but now that the establishment is anti-racist and promotes the view that the West is racist, so much so that it may ban people who claim America is not racist, agreeing that the West is racist means not rebellion, but agreement with the establishment. So, is it wrong to agree with the establishment if one happens to believe the same thing? No, but it should not be presented as revolutionary, because it is preaching. A pop star appeared as the devil, displaying satanic imagery in an award show. This was anti-establishment. This is pro-establishment. It's one thing to do something when it is opposed by the establishment, and another to do it when the establishment tolerates and even promotes it. It's one thing to point the finger at a member of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1950s, and even more so in the 1920s, and condemn him as a racist, and another to point the finger at a person today and condemn him as a racist. These pop stars would never do anything against the establishment. They would never use imagery that today could be considered even slightly racist or anti-transgender. Yes, it is not wrong to support the establishment if you agree with it. But once again, heavy metal never had songs against burglary, or against cheating on your spouse, or against making fun of disabled people. This constitutes preaching. Even if all metal fans agreed on which side is morally right on these issues, supporting the moral side would be preaching. And even worse, as with everything in politics, there are two sides to these issues, and both claim to have the moral high ground. Demanding that heavy metal, a music whose lyrics are typically occupied with fantasy, mythology, history and heroism, soul-searching, poetic or emotional dreamlike sequences, or rebelliousness, or having a good time, demanding that this heavy metal now support a political dogma is asking too much. There were bands whose lyrics dealt with social and political issues, but their members never gave interviews or participated in political events to support or oppose the death penalty, abortion, a new tax law, etc. So even if a band would write a song on these issues, it would be one song, and that would be it. Perhaps the most political metal album of the 1980s to have had an impact was one that was so vague, little of the actual politics of the members could be understood, apart from a litany of despair, gloom and doom, about war, pollution, humanity committing suicide, etc. The only clear instances of precise beliefs regarded an attack on Christianity and American foreign policy in Central America. Here, songs about the police or the border wall would be a suitable match. but this is hardly representative of the genre as a whole. There certainly was food for thought and serious subject matter in the lyrics of many bands, unlike pop, where all the songs and all the albums of all the musicians are about one thing, getting into someone's pants. In heavy metal, there were songs dealing with social and political issues, but they either explored the issue without supporting one side, or were on one side, but still did not support any political organization in the song or in statements or interviews. So, although heavy metal has always dealt with serious social and political issues, while pop has not, it is said that heavy metal should feel guilty because around 2020, pop started supporting fanatically one political extreme and heavy metal did not. There is the belief that metal must obey and deal with the deaths of 30 unarmed black citizens every year at the hands of the police, disregarding the 100,000 American citizens, disproportionately blacks, who die of drugs every year, and disregard the people who deal these drugs to them. If the establishment can disregard the second, then a metal band can disregard the first, or choose to write songs about the first, but cannot be obligated to do so. The conclusion is, the people who disregard over 7,000 murders of black people every year and vote for the prosecutors who refuse to prosecute career criminals and allow them on the streets so they can commit more crime at a time when the number of murdered citizens is increasing rapidly, the people who disregard the fact that the deaths from drugs increased from 17,000 to 100,000 within a few years, again disproportionately causing more deaths of black people, and the people who disregard killing 500,000 people in Syria to effect regime change over geopolitical gains, these people demand that heavy metal focus on the deaths of 30 unarmed black people at the hands of the police and focus on the hurt feelings of the transgender. In this respect, these people are the new church, and heavy metal is still at odds with and under attack by the church. The old church has simply changed to the new church. It is one thing to condemn something when this action places you against the establishment and the media, and another to condemn something when the establishment and the media are on the same side. It may still be right, but now it is not rebellious or the voice of an outsider, but, well, mainstream. But aren't some issues so important that people must change their ways and express their support or their condemnation of something? No. If orchestrating a civil war in Syria, killing 500,000 people and leaving 10 million homeless and refugees wasn't enough to force people to condemn their government, and it certainly did not convince fashionable pop stars or their followers to speak out, then one death or 1,000 deaths are not enough to force individuals to change the theme or content of their music. After all these so-called journalists are only doing what they think will benefit them or their careers. They try to be friendly to the big media, to suck up to their superiors. They ask for video games, TV shows, comic books, heavy metal, everything to be obedient to the new morality, a morality on which people have not voted, but is supported by the extremely rich. All these accusers of heavy metal are obedient followers, faithful lapdogs. Heavy metal is not this. These people are the worst sellouts. They do not simply sell out regarding music, but also regarding their souls. They are the worst kind of poser. Consider that all these multiculturalist accusers of heavy metal are followers of an ideology that is supported by big business and big government and by the fashionable pop and Hollywood film industry people. These are the worst racists, sexists, and homophobes. Consider Hollywood, The casting couch is legendary. Although very few of the crimes have come out, we know of many instances where both straight and gay producers and actors sexually exploited young female starlets or young boys, and nearly all of them were politically correct multiculturalists. Yet, multiculturalists accuse heavy metal or video games of being sexist, disregarding actual sexist criminal actions. While Hollywood fires or no longer employs people because they voted for a candidate they do not like or made a comment they do not like, people actually accused of at least 50 and perhaps hundreds of sexual assaults, half of them against teenagers, are allowed to work again in Hollywood, and the fashionable, woke, politically correct actors, crew, and producers have no problem working with them. Well, they would not work with someone who never hurt anyone if he had once made a racist comment or joke. They care about words and obedience to their ideological dogma. They do not care about actions and crimes. They may care about offended middle-aged women, but not about raped teenage boys. All these crimes were known to thousands of people in the industry. They knew about one celebrity sexually abusing hundreds of children for over 30 years and did nothing about it. Such is the quality of the character of the people who try to shame others into obeying their fashionable dogmas. It's like Scandinavia and the United Kingdom, where the great majority of rapes are perpetrated by Muslims, and yet feminists accuse white conservative men. These are people who find it acceptable for even a left-wing feminist to be investigated and possibly thrown in prison for 3 years because she offended someone when she said a man cannot be a mother and a lesbian. But at the same time, in the same area, immigrant rapists of 12-year-old girls receive 1 year of prison or only 1 month. Not of prison, but of community service. And until a few decades ago, Hollywood leftists urged homosexuals to hide their homosexuality in order to appeal to more people, especially to women, or did not use blacks in Western films, despite blacks being a large percentage of the cowboys. These decisions were made by people who identified with the left, and they did this for money. We cannot take seriously people who hide blacks in a place that was full of blacks, the Wild West, and then invent blacks in a place where there were no blacks, ancient Greece. Old people are removed from big movies and substituted by sexy 40-year-olds. This is ageism and ultimately sexism. At any rate, if fashionable multiculturalists can disregard 500,000 deaths of dark-skinned people and 10 million such people being made homeless refugees because of a civil war orchestrated intentionally by an American government which they themselves supported passionately, without protesting at all against this, then yes, heavy metal can disregard social issues, even 30 deaths per year of unarmed blacks at the hands of the police, especially when only few of these are considered legally wrongful or unjustified. Songs or statements against this are fine, but not a demand that absolutely all bands be in agreement and bend the knee to a dogma, to whatever is fashionable at the time, transgender rights, racism, the vaccine, Ukraine, etc.
Will you help us to ban the Bible?
To ban the Bible?
We're just trying to get rid of this hate speech just to help the New World Order. But it makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable. It's hurting a lot of people's feelings. Yeah. Just print here and, print birth date and a signature. You know, the Bible hurts a lot of people's feelings.
So I'm just signing to not have the Bible be sold on Amazon?
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds like a good thing for humanity.
We're just trying to get the Bible banned to help stop the hate speech. And
I'm on board with you there.
The Bible is the most sold book, so if we can get Amazon to stop selling that, we can help stop the hate speech. We're going to leave the Quran up there, though. We don't want to be Islamophobic, though. A signature to ban the Bible. It's for trying to get Amazon to stop selling these hateful books like the Bible. We just need a few more signatures.
I just have to sign?
Yeah, print birthday signature. You know, there's no room in today's society for that kind of hateful book.
Calling for is a petition to repeal the First Amendment. Just get rid of it. Blow it up. Get rid of it. Just as a reminder, the First Amendment protects the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, and oh yeah, freedom of petition. So what we're calling for is to repeal the First Amendment.
I think this is fantastic.
Okay.
I absolutely agree.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Love it.
Thank you.
I'll sign it for you guys, man.
All right, I appreciate it.
I appreciate what you're trying to do.
I think the Constitution should be one big safe space, right? I mean, hurt people's feelings should not be protected speech.
Yeah, I totally agree with where you're at.
Because you shouldn't be exposed to things you don't want to hear, you
Yeah.
know? That's not right. But, I mean, like, making fun of people is just not cool.
Like what you're doing.
Okay.
But like, I think it's really awesome that you're out here doing this.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
The demands for inclusiveness or no offensiveness are made by people who intend to never stop making demands, and the mentality to follow the influential likewise has no limits. Pranksters have convinced people on the street to sign a petition to ban the Bible as hate speech, and convinced 50 students at one of the top universities in the United States, Yale, to do away with the First Amendment and thus ban free speech. As the right wing is partly associated with the religious right and thus conservative authoritarian censorship, it is logical that it is not very attractive to youngsters, especially in the heavy metal community. However, the left wing is associated with politically correct authoritarian censorship. If this were not the case, perhaps the left would be able to be dominant in preference. But the authoritarianism from the left is now both the dominant force and far more oppressive than the earlier conservative authoritarianism was. Moreover, the right may be associated with the religious right, but the left is associated with the media and education system, both of which support the left religiously. Pun intended. This is what has been called the Academ-media complex. The term left here will not refer to the real socialist left, but the new cultural left, which promotes multiculturalism and political correctness, and which attempts to find or invent racism everywhere. To understand the issue, one must realize that certain fanatics on the left have always tried to both co-opt different forms of art and impose their ideology upon them by forbidding the parts they disagree with. Although there were leftists among the musicians, the hippies and leftist ideologues disliked each other, as the ideologues wanted others to obey their dogmas. In the late 70s, punk appeared during the rule of the Labour Party, as conservative Thatcher came to power 2 years later. Thus, punk, despite the leftist leanings, was not originally created to be in favor of the Labour Party, and was not an obedient follower of the political dogmas imposed by the left. This was true both for the first wave, as well as, obviously, all those who saw it as a subculture, or an underground fashion. And metal had nothing to do with politics whatsoever. However, leftist ideologues have attempted to impose their ideology here too. The attempt to forbid far-right political extremism shows this, as they obviously do not wish to forbid far-left political extremism. And then, not satisfied with fighting against the extreme, which is rather small, they try to impose their ideology on the large, central part that has dared to remain apolitical, outside politics, and has not obeyed their dogma. The fact is that the left demands conformity. This is not the older center-left that focused on economics and wanted better wages for the working class. This is an ideological dogma that sees any disagreement as intolerable. In the past, conservatives disliked heavy metal because they saw it as an attack on traditionalism. Likewise, the left disliked heavy metal because it did not advertise the ideological dogmas of the left, but instead focused on fantasy. It was a competitor for the minds of the young. Now, however, the left has found an opportunity to use heavy metal as a tool. In the past, the left never liked the hippies, fantasy films, video games, or heavy metal, until the opportunity presented itself to put leftist propaganda in all of these through a new generation of creators who follow the dictates of the new dogma promoted by the establishment and big business, all of which now promote leftist multiculturalism and the social justice dogma. Yes, it is their right to serve the establishment and be against working-class people, but that's the point. The left disliked metal because it did not support the leftist ideology but engaged in fantasy. It was a competitor for the minds of the young. But now the left sees metal as an opportunity to use it as a tool. It may seem strange that these two groups are working together, but they have a common purpose. This is in no way hidden. In short, big business and the new left have formed an unholy alliance to promote multiculturalism and the breakup of Western society into pieces, into splinter identity groups, by condemning the traditional structure, beliefs, institutions, national identity, and so on. So far, this is their right, but they try to force every sector to promote the same view and disallow it from promoting any other view. Supposedly, the aim of the left is to make life better for people. The purpose of any ideology, right or left, is to serve life. However, these leftists demand that life serve the left. To logical people, ideologies are meant to make it easier for people to enjoy all aspects of life: family, love, games, art, and among other things, heavy metal. Instead, these leftists want all of these to serve the left, just like religious fanatics wanted all life to serve their religion. Emma Goldman had said she did not wish to participate in a revolution that would not allow her to dance. But instead of revolution, what we now see is the desire for an authoritarian regime that will allow, however, a lot of dancing as long as it serves an ideological dogma. Back in the 1990s, after heavy metal's peak decade, one researcher investigated the reasons why leftist ideologues disliked heavy metal. Rock journalists had come out of the tradition of the 60s, and they liked Bob Dylan and the Beatles, and they saw hard rock as an insult to their mentality. Black Sabbath was almost unanimously condemned by rock journalists. In truth, while there were other forms of music that could be said to have been more complicated or innovative, it is clear that, from Black Sabbath and into the 1980s, metal, in musical quality, was far ahead of mainstream music, meaning the commercial music of the lowest quality that these publications promoted. Such journalists demanded that the anger found in metal be channeled into intelligent political action, because for music to have any value, it has to shake up the world. Now, heavy metal did deal with political issues, but not in the radical or reformist ways that the critics wanted. The sin that metal committed was that it did not offer hope in the future by means of politics. A chief characteristic of metal was the element of pleasure and passion. With the exception of punk-influenced bands, political reformism was alien to metal lyrics. The audience was unhip. Political correctness was completely alien to metal fans. They made judgments on politics, but these did not involve programs of collective action, something to be done by activists or by the state. The metal lyrics and attitude were not that deep conflicts and frustrations in life can be solved by political reform or revolution. Instead, these difficulties were to be overcome by the individual and through personal effort. As heavy metal did not promote collective action, leftist ideologues condemned heavy metal for not being committed to radical or reformist programs, essentially for not being leftist. Leftists had a problem with heavy metal because it did not fit conveniently into their categories. On the one hand, metal was rebellious and therefore did not promote conformity and discipline in a consumer society. On the other hand, it was not politically radical or reformist, so it was an anomaly, and as such it was dangerous because it could contaminate the purity of leftists and put in their hearts the element of pleasure and passion. As most rock critics were leftists, they had no place in their ideology for something like metal. How metal became reactionary? Metal fans did not become reactionary. You did. Metal was open-minded and logical, and many of its fans have remained so. However, many leftists moved from being open-minded and logical to fanatical dogmatism and new, exotic, irrational ideas such as demanding censorship. They became extremists and narrow-minded, but accuse those who have remained rational, open-minded moderates of being extremists and narrow-minded. They confuse open-mindedness with ideological dogmatism. They do not believe open-mindedness means to accept all views and judge them on their merits, facts, and circumstances. Instead, they believe open-mindedness means to be on one extreme, which is becoming more and more extreme. They actually believe that cancel culture and politically correct censorship is open-mindedness, while free speech is reactionary. These people adopted the name liberal when they were relatively liberal, and then, after they abandoned liberalism, they misleadingly kept the name liberal. They honestly believe that being fanatical and narrow-minded means being open-minded. Real open-mindedness means not being a blind, narrow-minded fanatic of any kind, but for leftists it means precisely being a fanatic of one kind. Their ideology is above open-mindedness and freedom. However, for other people, open-mindedness and freedom are their ideology. Their ideology is not the right or the left, but open-mindedness and freedom. Some have claimed that voters who do not always vote for the same side, but who may change depending on the issues and the candidates, are more likely to listen to heavy metal. If this is true, it is a compliment to heavy metal. It means its listeners are not dogmatic. This attitude, however, is accused of being negative. It is claimed that people on the right more easily accept leftist artists, while people on the left do not easily accept conservative artists. And it is claimed that it is the second that is the more serious mindset. However, this is clearly the more narrow-minded mindset, and, as it is admitted, not the heavy metal mindset. Roger Daltrey of The Who called this politically correct cancel culture a miserable world that the woke generation are going to create for themselves. Nick Cave called it a religion, the unhappiest religion in the world. John Lydon, or Johnny Rotten, stated that these people are not genuinely disenfranchised at all. Instead, they are selfish, divisive, judgmental, and vicious. They are spoiled children. John Lydon, who typically voted for the Labour Party, decided in the United States to vote for Trump.
The Donald. Wow. There's a complicated fella. And as one journalist once said to me, is he the political sex pistol?
Well, in a way.
In a way, but what I dislike is the left-wing media in America are trying to smear the bloke as a racist, and that's completely not true. There's many, many problems with him as a human being, but he's not that. And there just might be a chance that something good will come out of that situation because he terrifies politicians.
I mean, you live...
And this is joy to behold.
Right.
It does not matter if he is right or wrong. What matters is that this opinion is the opposite of the woke, social justice, politically correct left. This means that the social justice woke dogma is not the only acceptable opinion in music that is outside the mainstream. This social justice dogma may be partly correct or on occasion correct, but it is not a priori correct. In addition to the majority whose views we do not know, there are musicians on both sides of politics. Thus, these people from the social justice left have no right to demand that only their opinion be advertised everywhere and all other opinions be banned. The question has never been what you believe. It is always, do you accept other people having the right to disagree with you or not expressing a view at all, considering it to be beyond the scope of a particular area? Notice that the extremist side on the left attempts to ban the other parts, but of course the apolitical part does not try to ban the other parts, but merely wishes to exist. These people claim to be the ideological descendants of the 60s supporters of free speech, but in reality they are the opposite. They attempt to ban and impose censorship on the other side. While in the 60s the conservative establishment was relatively lenient towards the left, now that leftists are in power, they are far more fanatic in restricting the other side in universities and media, firing them from big companies, and of course attempting to remove them from metal. At the time around McCarthyism, around 12,000 people were fired for supporting communism, an ideology that killed 80 million people worldwide, and specifically for belonging to a party that supported a foreign government which was threatening their country and which itself had killed 20 million of its own citizens. Now people are fired for disagreeing with transgender bathrooms or gay marriage, or disagreeing with the idea that America is racist. These people have not supported an ideology that killed 20 million people. This is an ideological dogma that sees any disagreement as intolerable. Democracy is intolerable. At the time of the old religion, fanatics made false accusations of witch. Now with this new dogma akin to a religion, fanatics make false accusations of racist, sexist, homophobe. Similar to how Galileo Galilei was put on trial by the church for offending and disagreeing with the church, metal is condemned by the new church, the politically correct social justice multicultural left, for offending this church. It was not about science then, and it is not about sensitivity now. It is always about obedience to an authority. Shouting white power with a racist meaning is disgusting and dangerous, but perhaps it was meant by this man as a means to upset the journalists or politically correct activists who have become the new oppressors. It is unfortunate that the leftist media and activists have made some people think that shouting white power is the new middle finger to the establishment. The same man once stated that he has friends of all races and that people of all races should be proud of their race, and this includes white people who should be proud of their race like blacks are proud of theirs. Whites today should not accept the idea that they should feel perpetually guilty about what previous generations had done. This has nothing to do with racism, and nearly all the comments support him. However, social justice dogmatists would consider this to be racist, and thus would consider the heavy metal fans who commented to be racist. Thus, they invent the fake accusation: metal fans are racist. One may claim, even if others insult you, you should not insult them back, but simply accept it. But fighting back is human nature. It is the nature of every animal. Moreover, if a person chooses not to fight back, but simply accept it, this makes them obedient to the establishment. Thus, insulting people back is not only the right thing to do, but it is necessary for the preservation of democracy. Otherwise, people will be obedient to every demand made by small or large groups of people who demand obedience. These people may serve the state or may not, but wish one day to capture and control the state. In either case, they are fascistic. You are white, that makes you racist. You told a joke about women, that makes you sexist. You refuse to date transgender people, that makes you homophobic. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I will educate myself. Please continue to be my friends on social media. Consider these headlines. Leftist fanatic ideologues consider normal human behavior, like making a joke, to be racist, sexist, and homophobic, and they base their entire accusation against heavy metal fans on this. It's like saying, if you have long hair, you are racist, because we have declared long hair to be racist. It is not impossible to hear in the future that long blonde hair is offensive to people of other races. These people have already said that men urinating standing up is toxic masculinity. Wanting employees to be at work on time constitutes racism and colonialism. As long as metal offended Christians for decades, this was all right with the leftist ideologues. But if they discover some of this offending to be directed towards any minority, most of whose members vote for leftists, this is a huge problem for leftists. No one has ever seen headlines by inclusive journalists who oppose offensiveness against this, have they? One would expect that if it's brutal, then it would have to be offensive, wouldn't he? Again, this is like sanitizing horror movies so children can watch them, or in this case, women and minorities. Only offense against Christians or white heterosexual men who eat red meat is acceptable. Can heavy metal celebrate its own identity with pride? In society, there are different beliefs. Each person can support a number of these simultaneously, but can only have one priority, although depending on the issue, he may choose one or the other as the priority regarding that issue. One can support above all Christianity on one issue or patriotism on another. On the issue of ridiculing Christianity, one has to choose between supporting Christianity or supporting heavy metal. On the issue of whether heavy metal should obey the left or be independent, one can be either with heavy metal or with the left. No man can serve two masters.